G'day there, you're watching the Aussie Boom Guru. Today I've got a really quick demonstration of a new software slash web application that has been released in beta. So today we are looking at TestFit. We're looking at their Office beta demo. So I'm just going to show you how it works and give some thoughts to the team on ways they might be able to develop it in the future. But long story short, loving what I'm saying as always, and definitely recommend that you check out TestFit in all their other mediums they're using as well, such as applications. So thanks as always to Clifton Harness and his team over at TestFit for the work they're doing. I think it will radicalize how we do plan in architecture, whether it be directly through TestFit or through just the general movement that it's inspiring. So very exciting to see what they're doing, and great to see they're expanding into office space now. So previously I've done a few videos on TestFit. I've looked at just the software in general, and also just showing how you can take some TestFit data and bring it into Revit using Dynamo. But today we're focusing on the Office beta, which has been released less than a day ago. I've spent about maybe an hour just having a play with it, getting my thoughts about it, because they are looking for feedback. But I thought I'd show it to you as well, because maybe you're busy and don't have time to access the beta right now, but you might like to see exactly what is going on with it anyway. But if you do have time, definitely worth checking it out. It's really quick and easy to download, really quick to access, so I do recommend that you do. Anyway, in this video, I'm just going to cover how currently it works. It's in beta, obviously, so you're not going to be looking at a final product. But at the moment, it's already quite sophisticated, I would say. And I'll give you my first impressions, sort of how I found it to use and just general user interface feedback, and also just some development targets based on my experience in working with Office fit out and the bigger picture of how that fits into a commercial building typology. Anyway, just let's open it up. So this is the Office beta. The first thing you'll notice is that we're on the web. So this is obviously a really big difference from everything else they've done so far, in that every other part of TestFit is in an application that you host on your computer. So already I've got to say, like, hats off to the team. I know that putting an application on the web involves a lot of different work to building an application that runs on its own. So already really impressed just through that alone. Anyway, when you begin, you sort of just start with like a little set of what you call corridors, I guess, running through an office floor plate. Now, to begin with, I wasn't really sure where the facade was. I have to assume that this is actually the facade within this test boundary that we're dealing with, and you can see it works pretty much like TestFit does, and it's quick, very quick. Got a note here that I'm working on Australian internet speed here, and most people know that we're not highly ranked in the world. I think we're 62nd. I think after us comes Kazakhstan or something like that, so we're not exactly working on crazy high internet speeds here, but it's still running perfect speed. I'm not sure if it's pre-cached or if it's running directly through web exchanges every time something changes. My guess is because of the intensity of the algorithm, it's been cached and it's running without relying on the internet constantly, but still really impressive. As well as this, you can cut out corner volumes. I believe this is either being done to compensate for the corners on the site, or it's being done due to some office planning requirement that I'm not necessarily aware of about how you approach the building or how parking or external space has to interface. Some of what I'm looking at here, I'm pretty sure will be based on American standards, so some of this I may not be 100% familiar with. But regardless, I'm really impressed just off the bat of just how smooth and easy it is to work. Now, obviously, at a certain point, things fail to work, so it gets too small. So it's good that it understands that, at a certain point it won't work. If you change the least depth, this sort of changes the core, which makes me think this must be the facade of the building. So already really intuitive. You can see that it really quickly compensates for different layouts as you change the size, and you do have control over all the boundary points. Now, one thing I will say straight away, it would be good if there was like an ortho snap for the boundary, so you can square up the site volume. It's quite hard to square up the volume perfectly. So for someone like me that's a little bit OCD, and a lot of directors out there that I know are very OCD. Very roughly squaring it up, can be a little bit awkward sometimes. So that's already one thing I would recommend they try. I mean, I've obviously roughly squared it up there. As well as this, it looks like, I'm not sure if you can do, okay, you can add intervention points along the edge. I didn't even know you could do that. If you could move the entire boundary, that would be good. I don't believe you can grab the whole boundary. You can just add these little sort of intervening points. But if you could just grab the whole edge and just change the size of the site that way instead, that would be useful. You might be able to. There's probably a lot of little features I'm not necessarily aware of just yet. But as well as this, you have a lot of controls over all the metrics that sort of define your project. Such as forcing. I think this forces an ortho fit onto the side. I assume regardless of how your site changes, this just tries to create an orthogonal. Yeah, so that keeps your plan orthogonal even if your site boundary isn't. So I guess maybe that compensates for not being able to make the boundary perfectly orthogonal. But as well as this, you have control over the elevators and how many people are serviced per floor. So there are going to be some ratios that are being used here based on some sort of metric standard. We can see too, we have like how much space per occupant we're allowing for, and that has impacts on the overall core and amenity distribution. As well as this, we have control on the corridors themselves throughout the office, so the size of them. And also, I think we have control over the shell depth. Okay, so this must be whatever they're calling the shell, maybe. That's what the shell depth is controlling. So there must be some principle here I'm not quite across in terms of allowing for a shell. I'm not sure if this must be like a cold shell space that is separate to the office lease, maybe. Maybe that's what this is intended as. It's a separate portion of the floor plan that's dedicated to not being office sold. I'm not quite sure on that one though. And then you have various aspects of how far away the lease is allowed to be to the corridor, which I assume is like the maximum distance before you have to go from the outside of the facade into a corridor to make sure that you have a minimum distance that you can travel. As well as this, you have distances between stairs. I think in this case, this might be just a driven metric, but I believe this is just so you can verify your maximum point of choice travel distances by the looks of it. And then we also have people service per lift, so that's pretty handy. You also have full control over your stairs as well. You can do scissor stairs, or you can do single runs. You can change floor to floor, which has an impact on obviously the height of the stair to create enough steps to go between the floors, and various sub-metrics of the stair, which you can just click on and modify. Now, obviously, everything's in Imperial. One development target, obviously, which I'm sure you're looking at regardless, TestFit, is give us a metric version. we don't really understand Imperial units. They're quite confusing to Australian especially. But maybe there are different. Maybe there are some hidden controls in here that maybe activate them, but I know it's like a very early phase, so I know that's not really a high priority development target right now. It's more just getting a look and feel for how it is to use. So not a development target right now. Now you also have control over your amenities as well. So you've got these little amenity blocks which contain basins, sometimes urinals for male, and then I assume this is a standard pan and this is a ambulant pan by the looks of it. So at the moment it doesn't look like there's a way to change. Maybe you can change the depth. Now, we don't always have this sort of approach in an ambulant pan. If your corridor is deep enough, you can actually swing out a door from an ambulant pan and just have it in line with your standard toilets. So maybe graphically you might have the option to be able to do that, and that might, I don't know if it really saves any space, but graphically it just might make directors more comfortable if they're set on an amenity layout in their head. The challenge with like test fitting is I guess that sometimes people are very literal in how they look at designs, and shifting their mindset from not taking things too literally is going to be a challenge. So maybe just having some little flip controls that might help keep them more comfortable in approaching the software. Having said that, I know that these probably aren't your target clients by any means. We're looking to sort of shift the mindset of the industry rather than accommodate for it. But yeah, just a comment. But in general, the amenity layout is great. You can set all your parameters for sizes, and you can change. I don't know if the landing really changes much, but you can change your corridor size. So if you have like a very specific amenity set out principle you follow, it's very easy to capture it here. And obviously, eventually, once this develops, it will be great to have like a settings loader where you can just load in like a little XML or a JSON file that has like your company settings, so that you can just drop this in and load it into anyone's session that's running this. Or you have user profiles that remember your preferences alternatively. There's also a policy over the bathroom. So what's your male-female distribution ratio? How many lavatories and water closets do you need per person for the first, and one per remaining? So these are pretty standard principles, which they've captured really well. Also a urinal versus pan distribution in the male toilet. So I think this is great. This is pretty much exactly what we would need it to be. One thing that is missing, which I assume is probably a requirement in the States as well, is accessible toilets. We do typically need to allow for at least one accessible toilet per floor plate, just to enable a compliant design for disability access. So that probably is something that's necessary. And the good thing about an accessible toilet is it's pretty easy to know what size it needs to be, because typically the size is heavily standardized by most countries. I'm not super familiar with American standards, but I would assume that the disability toilet standard is very similar to Australia, where it's very regimented proportions that it needs to be. I've noticed too, sometimes you get a lot of stairs. I'm not sure if maybe like there's two stairs right next to each other there. There's probably some settings in the stairs that can be adjusted for distance between stairs that I'm probably missing out. But yeah, at the same time, it seems like it is very generous by default on stair distribution. But I guess it is quite a large building. As well as just like clustering is something that I would recommend that the algorithm tries to consider when you deal with a core. For example, here we have a stair and a lift bank, and there's a little bit of space between them. If these could intuitively sort of find each other a little bit more to create clustered cores, that might help better optimize and refine the design to how we'd end up doing it in the end, because typically we try to cluster centralized cores together for structural integrity, and otherwise we'd need to add band beams between here just to shore up this core structure. So that might be something that the algorithm could be better off detecting when it's trying to sort of rationalize the overall floor plate. But I mean, overall, really impressed by sort of what they've put together. And again, just the fact it's on the web, I mean, A+ for that. That's hard work. I'm sure you've put a lot of time into this. I've noticed too, you can sort of click on various hotspots on the floor plan, and they do seem to sort of change the way that the plan works. It looks like it sort of activates or deactivates sort of aisles, which is an interesting little feature. It's not really obvious to someone at first that they can do this, so I'm not sure if maybe a little sort of hint of what it's doing, like a little hover over text saying add aisle or remove aisle, might help people understand what this does, because I just almost found it by accident and sort of had to figure out what was happening when I did it. But it's cool that the option's there. It sort of reminds me of the option in TestFit where you can sort of intervene with the design to some degree, which is obviously a feature that's quite necessary in these sort of studies. But overall, A+. I think it's really intuitive. Definitely go check it out. But I guess I'll give you my thoughts on some development targets that I can see sort of lurking within this system. So again, first impression, it's great. It's not quite as intuitive as the app. It takes a little bit longer to figure out what's going on. But obviously we're looking at a beta here, so I mean, the UI is going to become more polished, obviously, once you really dive right into the final build of this. I think as well as that, I couldn't seem to support an F5 refresh. So if I do an F5, my F5 function's blocked at the moment. The only way I could refresh is if I copied and pasted the URL, and that essentially refreshes my session. You can do a T to reset, which seems to at least take you back to tabula rasa. But I did manage to eventually break the UI. So eventually, if you muck around with the site boundary too much, you do sort of lose the session and have to refresh it. So maybe finding a way to enable F5 refresh, or to implement a refresh button that the UI doesn't lose, that might be a development target, just to make it a little bit more friendly. But otherwise, it was pretty good. I didn't really have any major contentions with it. So some development targets. So I've listed them here, but I'm just going to go through them one by one, just to explain my logic behind them. So first of all, site boundaries. I'm not quite sure exactly how we interpret the planning constraints in this tool, whether the 4 boundaries are meant to be the site boundary or just the building volume that we need to fit. I'm assuming it's the building volume we need to fit, given that the facade can sort of reach out to the edge of the volume. But eventually I assume this is going to become a sort of a subcomponent of a bigger picture of how you actually set out your design. So you'll start with a site boundary, then set in by setbacks, and then fit that setback fill with your office design. Because typically we are working with a whole bunch of setbacks from the site boundary, just like we do in actual TestFit. So definitely, I think, consider that that's going to be a sub planning layer that will be required once you really push this. And I'm sure it's already in your mind anyway. As well as this, like just the facade lines themselves, it took me a while to figure out that that was the facade. So I'm not sure maybe if there's a way it can be more obvious, like maybe it's a thicker line than the rest of them. Because for a while I was saying, oh, I don't know where the facade is, I can't tell what the office is. And then it sort of clicked eventually that I was looking at, okay, that's the office, that's the outside of the office space. But maybe just thickening up that line might make it a bit clearer. Or like filling the floor with like a colour, so you can sort of tell what the office is and what the office isn't. Structure is something that will be quite important for planning. I know that like a company like TestFit wouldn't want to take responsibility for engineering-based aspects of a design, but I do think that they are important enough that like a very generic algorithm could be used to distribute a nominal column grid. If you want to put a big disclaimer on there saying, we are not endorsing that this will not fall over, but like just something that nominally indicates the type of structure you may be contending with when dealing with a floor plate like this. And that sort of ties into, I guess, just the actual office sub-arrangements that could potentially be accommodated in this layout. Now, I know that we're dealing with probably like what we call a cold shell here, so it's not really up to us to test fit the office for the tenant. It's really just up to us to put a floor space down and say, oh, this is your space, do what you want with it. But I think eventually our industry probably will find ways to say, okay, these are actually like 7 different arrangements you could accommodate on this floor plate. And we do this sometimes for lease plans. We say, oh, this is a potential fit out you could achieve if you so chose in this office. So to have some sub-arrangements available, even if they're very nominal, like just squares that represent a workstation space you could fit, this may further help sort of prove the case of the arrangement that's been achieved. On top of this, sometimes in office fit-outs we are dealing with warm shells. We may already have a tenant engaged who has actually asked the architect and the interior designer to actually fit out the floor plates in the design. Sometimes they're engaged early enough that they are around for the planning and development phase of the project. So I think the ability to introduce warm shell spaces might be handy as well, such as just clusters like where you can put meeting rooms. So this, for example, this might behave quite similarly to TestFit's functionality, where you can add amenity spaces in the residential floor plate. So similarly, I see it as a similar thing. You define the size of the space, and you'd sort of place it somewhere along the corridor, most likely. And I think this would be handy. This could be things like meeting rooms, tea points, those sort of spaces, but it could just be like general office. It doesn't have to be necessarily briefed. It could just be like a general allowance of space. And this can be quite important in doing sort of test fits to prove the feasibility of an office space. As well as just, like I said, a UAT would be good to sort of intervene onto the floor plate because usually it's necessary. Maybe even like cleaners rooms and comms rooms because usually these things are quite critical. Typically most offices will have one comms room per floor that sort of stacks through the building, and that allows you to distribute the comms network from the basement up all the way through the building. So definitely worth considering those elements being allowable in the floor plate as well. And finally, I guess this one's a bit of a challenge. I'm not quite sure how you would integrate it into the tool, but what we're doing in the office has a really big impact on the rest of the building, particularly the basement or the lowest floors of the building, whether they be above or below ground. Because what we do impacts obviously parking, end of trip head counts, and sometimes this is a proportion of the feasibility study. So I think whilst we are planning out the office floors, if there was the ability to say how many floors we're doing, and then just having feedback of the parking and basement requirements that would come from this based on a site footprint, that would give us an idea if we've maybe exceeded the potential yield or headcount that's possible in such a design. It wouldn't have to necessarily do the plan of the parking or the plan of the end of trip, but just giving us feedback on the impact that may have, because that is usually a critical relationship in a commercial building where you're dealing with max headcount and typical distribution of office floors throughout a tower. So I think that's important to add some sort of control for, just to give the user feedback on the impact they're having on the overall design. But like I said, it's great. It's on the web. That's brilliant. I'm all for things being on the web because obviously that makes it more accessible for people as well. You no longer need a beastie hardware rig to run a program. and they're usually easier to and more intuitive to run. If you can get this thing on mobile, I haven't tried it on mobile. I'm assuming it might work on mobile. I'll probably have to check that. If it does, like, far out, keep going. But regardless, keep pushing it. You're onto a good thing here. Like, office test fitting is definitely like a key prime target for TestFit, in my opinion. And also in future, like, warehouse and storage facilities, TestFit is like a no-brainer for those ones. So definitely consider that typology as well. So storage facilities and warehouse factory floors, like, they're no-brainers. But I guess the speed I was really impressed by as well, because I'm on the Aussie net speed, and that's a really bad internet speed. And I guess, like, ultimately, I just want to conclude with saying that you should hopefully be able to give TestFit some feedback. If you've watched my demonstration and you've noticed things as well, definitely let them know, because they are looking for your feedback. That's the point of the beta. And if you do get time to try it, definitely do, because I think this sort of software will be very, very relevant in the future of our industry. So as always, this presentation will be on my GitHub, like they all are. I guess, just follow this link, try it out. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it. So thanks for watching. If you're not already following and subscribing, feel free to do so. And I look forward to releasing future videos on my channel. Thanks. I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.